The blood on her hands had already dried to a rust-brown crust by the time Penelope Vance stumbled off the westbound stage and into the unforgiving darkness of the Colorado wilderness, her mind fractured by grief and her vision blurred by tears that would not stop falling. She had watched her father die that morning in a Denver hospital bed, his final words urging her to find her uncle in some distant mining town called Granite, a place she had never heard of until those last rattling breaths. The nurse had given her directions, a ticket, and a pitying look that Penelope could not bear to acknowledge. She had climbed aboard the stage in a daze, clutching the worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned in this world: a few dresses, her mother's wedding ring, and a letter of introduction to an uncle she had never met. The stage driver had been drinking. She smelled it on him when he helped her aboard, saw it in the way his hands shook as he gathered the reins. They had made it perhaps 20 miles outside of Denver when the horses spooked at something in the gathering dusk. The stage lurched violently to one side, and Penelope found herself thrown from her seat, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. When she managed to drag herself upright, gasping and disoriented, the stage was already disappearing into the distance, the driver either unaware of her fall or too drunk to care. Her satchel lay split open on the rocky ground, her belongings scattered across the scrub brush like the remnants of a life already falling apart. The sun had vanished behind the mountains by then, and the temperature was dropping fast. Penelope gathered what she could find in the fading light, stuffing dresses and undergarments back into the damaged bag with shaking hands. Her uncle's address, carefully written on a slip of paper by the nurse, had blown away. She had no idea which direction led to Granite or how far she still had to travel. She chose a direction at random and began walking, driven by some animal instinct that insisted movement was better than standing still in the growing cold. The landscape around her was alien and hostile, nothing like the civilized streets of Philadelphia where she had grown up, or even the rough frontier buildings of Denver. Here there was only darkness, the skeletal shapes of twisted juniper trees, and the distant howl of something that might have been wind or might have been wolves. Her shoes, elegant leather things meant for city streets, were not made for this terrain. Within an hour, her feet were blistered and bleeding. Within 2, she could no longer feel them at all. The cold had seeped into her bones, and her breath came in ragged gasps that burned her throat. She tried to remember her father's face, but could only see the sunken, yellow-skinned stranger he had become in those final days. She tried to pray, but found she had no words left. When she finally fell, it was almost a relief. The ground was hard and cold, but at least she could stop moving. Her eyes drifted closed, and she thought perhaps this was not such a terrible way to die. At least it would be over. At least she would not have to face another day of this unbearable grief and loneliness. That was when she saw the light. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, some trick of her oxygen-starved brain. But the light grew steadily brighter, bobbing toward her through the darkness with the rhythm of a walking man. She heard boots crunching on gravel, the jingle of spurs, and then a low voice speaking words she could not quite make out. Strong hands lifted her from the ground, and she found herself looking up into a face illuminated by lantern light. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled over his collar and eyes that were startlingly green even in the uncertain light. His face was tanned and weathered in a way that spoke of years spent outdoors, but his expression held genuine concern. "Madam, what in God's name are you doing out here alone?" His voice was rough but not unkind, carrying the slow drawl of someone raised in the territories. Penelope tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. He seemed to understand without explanation. He shrugged out of his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "My horse is just over that rise," he said, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Can you hold on to this lantern for me?" She managed to nod and grip the lantern handle with numb fingers. The metal was warm against her frozen skin, and she clutched it like a lifeline as the stranger carried her through the darkness. True to his word, a large bay gelding waited just beyond a small cluster of rocks, its reins tied to a stunted tree. The cowboy settled her carefully in the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm circling her waist to keep her steady. He took the lantern from her and held it high, guiding the horse with his knees alone. "There's a ranch about 3 miles south," he said, his voice close to her ear. "The Lazy L. That's where I work. We'll get you warmed up and fed, and tomorrow we can figure out where you were headed." Penelope wanted to thank him, to ask his name, to explain how she had come to be wandering lost in the Colorado wilderness. But exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and she found herself slumping back against his chest, her eyes sliding closed despite her best efforts to stay alert. She was dimly aware of the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the warmth of the man's body at her back, and the swaying light of the lantern cutting through the darkness. It felt like being rocked in a cradle, safe and protected for the first time since her father had fallen ill 6 months ago. When she next opened her eyes, they were approaching a sprawling ranch house with warm light spilling from its windows. Dogs barked announcement of their arrival, and she heard voices calling out in question and concern. "Found her about 3 miles north," the cowboy called back. "Looks like she got thrown from a stage or wagon. She's half frozen and pretty banged up." More hands reached up to help her down, and she found herself surrounded by weathered faces full of curiosity and kindness. An older woman with silver hair, pulled back in a severe bun, took charge immediately, issuing orders in a voice that brooked no argument. "Get her inside and by the fire. You men clear out and give her some space. Someone fetch some warm water and blankets." Penelope was ushered into a large rustic kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and beef stew. The blessed heat of the fireplace made her skin prickle painfully as sensation returned to her frozen limbs. She was settled into a rocking chair close to the flames, and the older woman began the process of removing her ruined shoes and torn stockings with surprisingly gentle hands. "Poor child," the woman murmured, examining the blistered, bleeding feet. "What were you thinking, walking through the wilderness in shoes like these? Where on earth were you trying to go?" "Granite," Penelope managed, her voice hoarse and cracked. "I was trying to reach Granite. My uncle lives there, or I think he does. I lost the address." The woman looked up sharply, her weathered face creasing with surprise. "Granite? That's another 15 miles west of here. You were heading due south when Grayson found you. You would have ended up clear in New Mexico if you'd kept going." Grayson? So that was his name. Penelope turned her head, searching for the man who had rescued her, and found him standing in the doorway, watching with those startling green eyes. He had removed his hat, and she could see that his dark hair was indeed curling and unruly, as though it had not seen a barber's scissors in some time. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "You saved my life." He ducked his head slightly, looking almost embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same, madam. Just lucky I was out checking the fence line so late. We had some cattle go missing yesterday, and I was trying to see if I could spot any signs of rustlers." "Lucky for me," Penelope said softly. The older woman made a disapproving sound. "Luck or providence makes no difference now. What matters is getting you well again. I'm Martha Lancaster, and this ranch belongs to my son. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to recover. In the morning, we can send someone to Granite to find your uncle." "Vincent," Penelope said. "Vincent Vance. He works in the mines, or at least he did 5 years ago. That's all I know." "Vincent Vance," Martha frowned thoughtfully. "Can't say the name sounds familiar, but that doesn't mean much. Miners come and go in these parts. We'll ask around." She finished bandaging Penelope's feet with strips of clean cloth, and then insisted on helping her change out of her torn, dirty dress into a clean nightgown that must have belonged to Martha herself. Penelope was too exhausted to protest, too grateful for the simple comfort of warmth and safety to care about propriety. She was fed hot stew and fresh bread, given water sweetened with honey, and then shown to a small but clean bedroom on the second floor. The bed had a real mattress and quilts that smelled of lavender, and when Penelope finally lay down, she thought she might weep from the simple pleasure of it. But sleep came too quickly for tears, dragging her down into darkness so complete that even her dreams could not find her. She woke to brilliant sunlight streaming through white curtains and the sound of men's voices drifting up from somewhere below. For a moment, she could not remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory returned in a rush. Her father's death, the stage accident, the terrible cold darkness, and the cowboy with the lantern who had appeared like an angel in her darkest hour. Grayson Lancaster, she thought, testing the name in her mind. Though perhaps his last name was not Lancaster. Martha had said the ranch belonged to her son, not that Grayson was her son. Penelope sat up carefully, wincing at the pain in her feet and the stiffness in her bruised body. Someone had brought her satchel up during the night, and it sat on a chair near the window, hastily repaired with what looked like saddle leather and rawhide stitching. She found a simple dress inside, wrinkled but clean, and managed to pull it on despite her protesting muscles. Getting down the stairs proved more challenging. Her bandaged feet could barely support her weight, and she had to grip the railing with both hands, taking one step at a time like a child learning to walk. By the time she reached the bottom, she was sweating and dizzy. Martha appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Child, you should have called for help. Those feet need at least a few more days of rest before you go putting weight on them." "I've imposed enough already," Penelope said. "I cannot just lie about while you all work." "Nonsense. You're recovering from a serious ordeal. Now, come sit down before you fall down." Martha guided her to the same rocking chair by the kitchen fire and brought her a plate heaped with eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and biscuits with butter and jam. Penelope had not realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her, and then she could barely eat fast enough. "Ah, that's better," Martha said with satisfaction. "You looked like a strong wind would blow you away last night. Where are you from, child?" "Philadelphia originally," Penelope said between bites. "But my father and I moved to Denver 6 months ago. He was ill with consumption and thought the mountain air might help." She paused, swallowing hard. "He died 2 days ago. His brother, my uncle Vincent, was the only family he could think to send me to." Martha's weathered face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. Consumption is a cruel disease. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 21. "Old enough to be on my own, I suppose, but I've never been alone before. My mother died when I was 10, and it's been just my father and me ever since." Penelope set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "I don't know what I'll do if we cannot find my uncle." "One problem at a time," Martha said firmly. "First, we find him. Then we worry about what comes next. Grayson rode out at dawn to ask around in Granite. He should be back by this afternoon with news." "Grayson is not your son?" Penelope asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Martha smiled slightly. "No, though I've come to think of him almost as one. My son Thomas runs this ranch, but he's up in Cheyenne right now buying breeding stock. Grayson has worked for us for about 3 years now. Best ranch hand we've ever had, and that's the truth. He's got a way with horses that borders on magical, and he works harder than any 2 other men combined." "Where is he from?" "Texas originally. Came up this way after the war ended, looking for work and a fresh start. He doesn't talk much about his past, but then most men out here don't." Martha began clearing away the breakfast dishes. "He's a good man, though, steady and reliable. Thomas trusts him to run things when he's away, which says a lot." Penelope found herself thinking about the way Grayson had looked at her in the lantern light, the gentleness with which he had wrapped his coat around her freezing body. She'd met plenty of young men in Philadelphia, earnest suitors who had courted her with flowers and poetry and careful propriety. None of them had made her feel the way she had felt in those brief moments in Grayson's arms, safe, protected, and somehow understood without need for words. But that was foolish romantic thinking, the kind of nonsense that led to heartbreak and disappointment. He had simply done what any decent person would do upon finding someone in distress. There was nothing more to it than that. She spent the rest of the morning sitting by the fire, mending the torn hem of one of her dresses with needle and thread Martha provided. The older woman kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling stories about the ranch and the surrounding territory with the ease of someone who genuinely enjoyed talking. Penelope learned that the Lazy L had been established 15 years earlier, when Martha's late husband had brought her west from Missouri. He had died 7 years ago from a kick to the chest by a spooked horse, leaving Thomas to run the ranch at age 19. It had been a struggle, but they had managed to hold on and even prosper, building the Lazy L into one of the most successful cattle operations in the region. Of course, it helps that Thomas inherited his father's head for business and my stubborn refusal to give up, Martha said with a laugh. And having good men like Grayson doesn't hurt. We've got 6 hands working here full-time, plus a few seasonal workers we bring on during calving and branding. The sound of hoofbeats outside made them both look up. Martha moved to the window and peered out, then turned back with a smile. "That's Grayson now. Let's see what he found out." Penelope's heart began to beat faster, though she told herself it was only anxiety about her uncle and not anticipation at seeing the cowboy again. She set aside her sewing and smoothed down her dress, suddenly very conscious of how she must look with her hair hanging loose and unbrushed down her back. Grayson entered through the kitchen door, bringing with him the smell of horse and leather and cold air. He pulled off his hat and nodded to both women, his green eyes finding Penelope's face immediately. "I've found your uncle," he said without preamble. "Vincent Vance. He's working at the Silver Queen mine and living in a boarding house on the north end of town. I spoke to him myself and told him you were here." Relief washed over Penelope so powerfully that she felt dizzy. "Is he well? What did he say?" "He seemed shocked, said he hadn't heard about your father's death and didn't know you were coming west, but he said to bring you to him as soon as you're able to travel. The boarding house is not fancy, but it's clean and respectable, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen who keeps strict rules about propriety." "When can I go?" Penelope asked, trying to stand and then gasping as pain shot through her injured feet. "Not today," Martha said firmly, "and probably not tomorrow either. Those feet need at least another few days of healing, or you'll do permanent damage. Your uncle will have to wait, or he can come here to visit if he's that eager to see you." Grayson nodded in agreement. "I told him you'd been injured and needed time to recover. He understood. Said he'd try to get away from the mine on Sunday to come meet you if that suits." "Sunday is 4 days away," Penelope protested, though even as she said it, she knew they were right. Her feet throbbed with every heartbeat, and the thought of putting shoes on them made her feel ill. "4 days is not so long," Martha said gently, "and it will give you time to rest and regain your strength. You've been through a terrible ordeal, child. Your body needs time to heal, even if your mind is eager to press forward." Penelope wanted to argue further, but the truth was that the short walk downstairs that morning had exhausted her more than she cared to admit. She nodded reluctantly and settled back into the rocking chair. Grayson lingered in the doorway, turning his hat in his hands. "Is there anything else you need, Miss Vance? Anything I can bring you from town?" "You've already done so much," Penelope said. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for saving my life." He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude, his tanned face flushing slightly. "No repayment necessary, madam. I'm just glad I happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Providence," Martha said firmly. "The good Lord knew this child needed help, and he put you in her path. No such thing as coincidence in this world." Grayson did not look entirely convinced of this theological interpretation, but he was too polite to argue with Martha. He excused himself to get back to work, and Penelope found her eyes following him as he left, noting the broad set of his shoulders and the easy, confident way he moved. The next 4 days passed in a strange blur of routine and recovery. Penelope slept more than she had in months, her body finally able to release the tension and exhaustion that had built up during her father's long illness and death. Martha fed her enormous meals and treated her bandaged feet twice daily with some kind of herbal salve that smelled terrible but seemed to help the healing. She saw Grayson only in passing, brief glimpses as he came in for meals or crossed the yard on various errands. But she found herself thinking about him constantly, remembering the warmth of his arms around her and the steady calm of his voice in the darkness. When she caught sight of him through the window, working with the horses in the corral or repairing a section of fence, she could not seem to look away. It was foolish, she told herself sternly. She was a city girl with no experience of ranch life, and he was a cowboy with no reason to be interested in someone like her. Besides, she would be leaving soon to live with her uncle in Granite. There was no point in developing feelings for a man she would likely never see again after Sunday. But her heart seemed to have other ideas, beating faster every time she heard his voice or footsteps approaching. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance, brushing her dark hair until it shone and pinching her cheeks to bring color to them. Martha noticed, of course, and said nothing, but Penelope caught the knowing smile on the older woman's face more than once. On Saturday evening, Thomas Lancaster returned from Cheyenne with a dozen new breeding horses and news of good prices for their beef. He was a big, friendly man in his mid-30s, with his mother's sharp blue eyes and his late father's booming laugh. He greeted Penelope with genuine warmth and insisted she stay as long as she needed. "Any friend of Grayson's is a friend of ours," he said, shaking her hand with careful gentleness. "That man would give the shirt off his back to a stranger in need. I'm just glad he found you when he did." That evening, Martha insisted Penelope join them all for dinner at the long wooden table in the dining room. It was a loud, boisterous affair, with Thomas and the ranch hands trading stories and jokes, while Martha presided over the meal with benevolent authority. Penelope found herself seated next to Grayson, acutely aware of his presence beside her. He was quieter than the other men, speaking only when directly addressed, but she noticed that when he did speak, everyone listened. There was a natural authority about him, a quiet competence that commanded respect without demanding it. "Tell us about Philadelphia, Miss Vance," Thomas said, helping himself to more roast beef. "I've never been east of St. Louis myself. What's it like in the big cities?" Penelope described the cobblestone streets and brick row houses, the gas streetlights and horse-drawn trolleys, the markets and theaters and churches. It felt like talking about another world, one that seemed impossibly distant and foreign compared to this rough, beautiful western landscape. "Do you miss it?" Grayson asked quietly, his first direct words to her all evening. She thought about it carefully before answering. "I miss my father. I miss the life we had before he got sick. But Philadelphia itself?" She shook her head. "No, I don't think I do. It always felt cramped and crowded to me, like there wasn't enough room to breathe. Out here, the sky goes on forever." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "I know what you mean. I felt the same way when I first came west from Texas, like I could finally stretch out and really live." Their eyes met and held for a moment too long to be merely polite, and Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked down at her plate, her heart hammering. After dinner, while Martha and the cook cleaned up in the kitchen, Thomas suggested they all move to the sitting room for coffee and music. One of the ranch hands produced a battered guitar, and another had a harmonica, and soon they were playing lively tunes that had everyone tapping their feet. Penelope found herself sitting on the sofa next to Grayson, both of them slightly apart from the main group. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once. "How are your feet healing?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Much better. Martha has been taking wonderful care of me. I think I'll be able to walk normally by tomorrow." "That's good. Your uncle will be relieved to see you're recovering well." "Yes." Penelope hesitated, then added, "I suppose I'll be leaving soon after that. Going to live with Uncle Vincent in Granite." "I suppose you will," Grayson said, and she thought she detected a note of regret in his voice, though perhaps that was only wishful thinking. "Have you ever been to Granite?" she asked, desperate to keep the conversation going. "A few times. It's a mining town, rough around the edges, but decent enough. The Silver Queen is one of the bigger operations, so it's fairly stable work for those willing to do it. I've never lived in a mining town before." "It will be different from what you're used to," he said carefully, "but you'll adjust. You're stronger than you probably think." She looked at him in surprise. "What makes you say that? You walked miles through freezing darkness with torn feet and never gave up. That takes a strength most people don't have." "I didn't have much choice," Penelope said quietly. "It was walk or die." "There's always a choice. You could have given up, let the cold take you. But you kept going." He turned to face her more fully, his green eyes intense in the firelight. "That's not something to dismiss lightly, Miss Vance. You have more steel in you than you know." His words touched something deep inside her, a part of herself she had not fully acknowledged until that moment. He was right. She had kept going when it would have been easier to quit. She had survived her mother's death, her father's long illness, the devastating grief of losing him, and the terrifying ordeal of being lost in the wilderness. She was still here. She was still fighting. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed to hear that." "It's only the truth," Grayson said, and then seemed to catch himself, as though realizing he had said more than he intended. He cleared his throat and looked away, back toward the music and laughter filling the room. But the moment lingered between them, fragile and precious as spun glass. Penelope found herself wanting to reach out and touch his hand, to make some physical connection that would anchor this feeling before it could slip away. She did not dare, not with everyone watching, but the wanting was so strong it made her ache. Sunday morning dawned cold and bright, with frost sparkling on the brown grass and the mountains standing sharp against the brilliant blue sky. Penelope dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a dark blue wool that was respectable without being overly formal. Her feet were still tender, but healing well, and Martha had given her a pair of soft leather moccasins that were much more comfortable than her ruined city shoes. Vincent Vance arrived at midday, riding a rented horse from the Granite livery. He was a tall, thin man in his early 50s with graying brown hair and a weathered face that looked as though it had been carved from granite itself. His clothes were rough working garments, but clean and carefully mended. When he saw Penelope, his stern expression crumbled into something softer and more vulnerable. "Lord above, you look just like your mother, just exactly like her when she was your age." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm told I have her coloring, but father's features." "Perhaps, but the expression, the way you hold yourself, that's pure Lily." He opened his arms hesitantly, and Penelope stepped into them, letting this stranger who was her blood hold her while they both grieved the brother and father they had lost. When they finally pulled apart, Vincent wiped at his eyes without shame. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when John passed. I didn't know he was in Denver, didn't know he was sick. We lost touch years ago after a foolish argument neither of us could remember the cause of later. I always meant to write, to make things right, but I kept putting it off." "He spoke of you at the end," Penelope said. "He wanted me to find you, to have family around me." "And so you shall," Vincent said firmly. "I may not have much, but what I have is yours. We'll make it work, you and me. We're all the family each other has now." They spent the afternoon talking, filling in the gaps of 15 years of separation. Vincent told her about his work in the mines, about the small but growing community in Granite, about the harsh but honest life of a miner. Penelope told him about her father's illness, about their time in Denver, about the terrifying journey that had nearly ended in her death. "I owe this man, Grayson Lancaster, a debt I can never repay," Vincent said, looking over at where Grayson stood working with the horses in the corral. "He saved your life and asked nothing in return." "He seems to think it was nothing special," Penelope said. "Just what anyone would have done. Most men would have ridden on by in the dark, telling themselves they didn't see anything. It takes a special kind of person to stop and help a stranger." Vincent studied her face carefully. "You're sweet on him." Penelope felt her cheeks flush. "I barely know him." "Sometimes that's all it takes. Your mother and I knew each other less than a week before I knew I wanted to marry her." He paused, then corrected himself. "Before I knew she was too good for a rough miner like me, and I should let her go to marry your father instead. John was always the successful one, the one who made something of himself." "Father loved her very much," Penelope said carefully, sensing old wounds beneath her uncle's words. "I know he did. And she loved him. That's how it should have been." Vincent cleared his throat. "But what I'm saying is, don't dismiss your feelings just because they came on fast. The heart knows what it knows." When the afternoon light began to fade, Vincent prepared to ride back to Granite. He embraced Penelope again and promised to come back the following Sunday to collect her, giving her another week to fully recover and gather her strength for the move. "The boarding house has a room ready for you," he said. "It's small but clean, and Mrs. Chen is a good woman. You'll be safe and comfortable there." After he left, Penelope felt strangely deflated. She should be grateful, she told herself. She had found her uncle, had a place to go, a future that was settled even if it was not the one she would have chosen. But the thought of leaving the lazy Elle, leaving Martha's warm kitchen and the comfortable rhythms of ranch life, filled her with unexpected sadness. Leaving Grayson filled her with something much stronger than sadness. That evening, unable to sleep, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out onto the front porch. The night was cold and clear, the stars so bright and numerous they looked like spilled salt across black velvet. She stood at the railing, breathing in the sharp, clean air and trying to memorize everything about this moment. "Cannot sleep?" She jumped and turned to find Grayson emerging from the shadows at the far end of the porch. He had a cigarette in his hand, the glowing tip bright in the darkness. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said. "I come out here sometimes when I need to think." "I don't mind," Penelope said, her heart racing, for reasons that had nothing to do with being startled. "What do you think about?" He took a long drag on the cigarette and exhaled slowly. "Life, choices, the future. That sounds very philosophical for a cowboy, she said, meaning it as a gentle tease. He smiled slightly. Even cowboys have thoughts beyond cattle and horses, Miss Vance. I know. I'm sorry. That was rude of me. No offense taken. He moved to lean against the railing beside her, careful to keep a respectable distance between them. Your uncle seems like a good man. He does. I'm fortunate to have found him. Granite is not such a bad town. You could do worse. I'm sure you're right. Penelope paused, then added quietly, but I'll miss this place. I'll miss everyone here. Grayson was silent for a long moment. We'll miss you too. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Penelope wanted to ask if he would miss her specifically, wanted to know if she was imagining the tension that seemed to crackle whenever they were near each other, but she did not dare, terrified of the answer either way. Tell me about Texas, she said instead. What was it like growing up there? He took another drag on his cigarette, his expression distant in the starlight. Hot? Dusty? My father had a small ranch outside San Antonio. Nothing like this place, just enough land for a few cattle and some horses. He died when I was 16, and my mother followed a year later. I sold the ranch and headed west, looking for work. I'm sorry. Losing both parents so young must have been terrible. It was hard, he admitted, but it taught me to stand on my own, to rely on myself. Maybe that's not such a bad thing to learn young. My mother died when I was 10, Penelope said, from influenza. One day she was there and the next she was gone. I remember my father telling me she was at peace now, with God, but I just felt angry. How could God take my mother away when I still needed her so badly? Did you ever find an answer to that question? No, I don't think there is one. Bad things happen to good people, and we're left to make sense of it as best we can. She looked up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. But being out here, under this sky, it's easier to believe that we're part of something larger, that our small griefs and joys matter, even if we can't always see how. Grayson was looking at her now instead of at the stars, his green eyes dark and unreadable in the low light. You're not like most women I've met. Is that a compliment or an insult? Penelope asked, trying for lightness despite the sudden thickness in her throat. A compliment. Definitely a compliment. He seemed to struggle with himself for a moment, then added, I wish you weren't leaving. The words struck her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. I have to go. I have nowhere else. You could stay here. Martha adores you and we could always use help around the ranch. Thomas would hire you on in a heartbeat if I asked him. Penelope's heart was hammering so hard she thought he must surely hear it. Why would you ask him? Grayson turned to face her fully, tossing the cigarette butt into the dirt below and grinding it out with his boot heel. Because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't want to watch you ride away. The world seemed to stop spinning. Penelope stared at him, unable to believe what she had just heard. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and strong and kind. I know you're beautiful inside and out. I know that when I carried you out of the darkness, something in my chest cracked open, and I haven't been able to close it back up since. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I know this is fast and probably foolish, but I also know that if I let you leave without telling you how I feel, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Tears were streaming down Penelope's face, hot against her cold cheeks. I'm falling in love with you too. I've been trying so hard not to, telling myself it was impossible, but I can't help it. Grayson reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. Then don't help it. Don't fight it. Stay here with me and see where this goes. What about my uncle? I can't just abandon him after he offered to take me in. We'll talk to him together, explain the situation. If he's half the man he seems to be, he'll understand. Grayson's hand cupped her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Penelope. I'm just asking you to give us a chance, to see if what we're feeling is real and lasting. She leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. It feels real to me. To me too, he murmured, and then he was kissing her. It was nothing like the few chaste kisses she had experienced with suitors in Philadelphia. This was fire and hunger and desperate longing, his arms coming around her to pull her close while her hands fisted in his shirt. He tasted like tobacco and coffee and something indefinably masculine that made her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grayson rested his forehead against hers. "Say you'll stay. Please." "I'll stay," Penelope whispered. "God help me, I'll stay." The next morning, she told Martha her decision. The older woman's face lit up with undisguised delight. "I was hoping you two would realize what was right in front of your faces," she said, pulling Penelope into a warm embrace. "You belong here, child. I've known it since Grayson carried you through that door a week ago." Thomas was equally supportive, offering Penelope work helping Martha with the cooking and household management, as well as keeping the ranch's books and handling correspondence. The pay was modest, but room and board were included, and Penelope found herself grateful for the chance to earn her own way rather than being dependent on charity. The harder conversation was with Vincent when he returned the following Sunday. Penelope met him at the door, with Grayson standing supportively at her side, and explained as honestly as she could that her plans had changed. Vincent listened without interruption, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, studying both of them carefully. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "I'm not going to lie and say I'm not disappointed," he said. "I was looking forward to having you near, to building that relationship we should have had all along. But I'd be a hypocrite and a fool to stand in the way of young love when I can see clear as day that it's the real thing." "You're not angry?" Penelope asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Angry? No, sad for my own sake? Maybe a little. But mostly I'm happy for you, niece. Life's too short and too hard to pass up a chance at real happiness when it comes along." He shook Grayson's hand firmly. "You take good care of her, you hear me? She's all the family I've got left in this world." "I will, sir," Grayson said solemnly. "You have my word on that." Vincent visited twice more over the next month, growing easier with both Penelope and Grayson each time. He and Grayson discovered a shared passion for poker and spent hours playing cards and trading stories, while Penelope and Martha looked on with amused tolerance. As winter settled over Colorado in earnest, Penelope found herself falling into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to cook for a dozen hungry men, to keep complex financial records, to recognize the signs of sick cattle and troubled horses. She learned to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of animals, to judge distance by the time it took to ride rather than walk. And she learned Grayson, the quiet intensity of him, the unexpected humor that surfaced when he relaxed his guard, the fierce protectiveness he showed toward anyone or anything under his care. They spent their evenings together on the porch or by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship beneath the passion. He courted her properly, with Martha serving as a watchful chaperone, never pushing for more than Penelope was ready to give. But the wanting was there between them, simmering just beneath the surface, growing stronger with every stolen kiss and lingering touch. On Christmas Eve, after a dinner that left everyone stuffed and sleepy, Grayson pulled Penelope aside and led her to the barn. Fresh snow was falling outside, muffling all sound, and the barn was warm and fragrant with the smell of hay and horses. "I have something for you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." He pulled a small wooden box from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a ring. Not gold or silver, but carved from a dark, beautifully grained wood, polished to a soft shine. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect. "I made it myself," Grayson said quietly. "From a piece of walnut wood I've been carrying around for years, waiting for the right purpose for it. The moment I saw you, I knew what it was meant to be." Penelope lifted the ring from the box with trembling fingers, feeling the smooth warmth of the wood. "It's beautiful. It's not fancy. I know you probably expected something better, something more valuable." "It's perfect," she said firmly, meeting his eyes. "It's the most perfect thing anyone has ever given me, because you made it with your own hands." Grayson took the ring from her and dropped to one knee in the soft hay. "Penelope Vance, I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards, but I know my own heart, and my heart is telling me that you are the woman I've been waiting for all my life. Will you marry me?" There was only one possible answer. Had been only one possible answer since the moment he had told her he was falling in love with her. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her alone. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a joy and relief that made her laugh against his mouth. "When?" she asked when they came up for air. "When do you want to get married?" "Tomorrow if I could, but I suppose we should wait at least until the circuit preacher comes through again. Martha would never forgive us if we ran off and got married without a proper ceremony." The circuit preacher was not due back through their area until February, which gave them 2 months to plan. It was not enough time, Martha insisted, fussing over every detail, but they would make do. A dress would have to be ordered from Denver, and flowers would be impossible in winter, but they could make the house beautiful with evergreen boughs and candles. Penelope wrote to Vincent with the news, and he wrote back with congratulations and a promise to attend, along with a generous gift of money that she suspected he could not really afford. She was touched beyond words by his support, by the way he had accepted her choices without judgment or resentment. The winter months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Penelope's dress arrived in January, a simple but elegant cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Martha took up the hem and let out the waist slightly, and when Penelope tried it on, she felt like a princess from a fairy tale. Grayson grew more nervous as the wedding day approached, worrying about details that Penelope found endearing. Did he have anything fine enough to wear? Would the hands behave themselves at the celebration afterward? What if the preacher could not make it through the snow? "Then we'll wait until he can," Penelope assured him. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me now." "Best thing that ever happened to me," he said, pulling her close and resting his chin on top of her head, "getting stuck with you." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a field of diamonds. The circuit preacher arrived right on schedule, a jovial man in his 60s who had been marrying couples and baptizing babies in Colorado territory for over 20 years. Vincent rode in from Granite with a handful of miners who had become his friends, rough men who cleaned up surprisingly well and brought generous gifts of silver ore and hand-carved household items. The ranch hands put on their best clothes, and Thomas stood up as Grayson's best man, while Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Penelope walked down the makeshift aisle in the ranch house's main room on her uncle's arm, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Grayson waited for her at the front, wearing a new white shirt and black vest, his dark hair slicked back and his green eyes shining with emotion. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, the preacher's words about love and commitment and partnership resonating in the warm, candlelit room. When Grayson slipped a matching wooden wedding band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered as the preacher pronounced them, husband and wife. "I love you too," Grayson said, and kissed her to enthusiastic applause and whistles from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed was raucous and joyful, with more food than anyone could possibly eat, and music that kept everyone dancing late into the night. Penelope danced with her new husband, with her uncle, with Thomas and the ranch hands, spinning until she was dizzy and laughing until her sides hurt. When the party finally wound down in the small hours of the morning, Grayson carried her across the threshold of the small cabin that Thomas had given them as a wedding present. It was just one room with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace, but it was theirs, a place where they could build their life together. He set her down gently and began unbuttoning the back of her dress with fingers that shook slightly. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," Penelope admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he said with a shaky laugh. "I keep thinking I'm going to do something wrong and disappoint you." She turned to face him, taking his face in her hands. "You could never disappoint me. I love you, Grayson Lancaster. Everything else is just details." They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with reverent attention. Grayson was gentle and patient, making sure of her comfort and pleasure before seeking his own. When they finally lay tangled together in the narrow bed, both breathless and awed by what had just passed between them, Penelope felt complete in a way she never had before. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For finding me in the darkness, for lighting that lantern and leading me home." He kissed the top of her head. "You were always meant to be here. I was just lucky enough to be the one who found you." The first year of their marriage was not easy. Ranch life was harder than Penelope had anticipated, with long hours and backbreaking work and never enough money to feel truly secure. But they were happy, building their life together one day at a time, supporting each other through the inevitable struggles and setbacks. Grayson proved to be everything she had hoped for in a husband, steady, hard-working, devoted, and surprisingly tender in private moments. He made her laugh with his dry humor and held her when she cried on the anniversary of her father's death. He taught her to ride better and shoot straight, skills she had never imagined needing but found invaluable. In return, she managed their small household with efficiency, helped Martha with the larger ranch cooking and cleaning, and kept meticulous records of their personal finances. She wrote letters to Vincent regularly and was pleased when he visited more frequently, forming a genuine friendship with Grayson that went beyond family obligation. In the fall of their first year together, Penelope realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy, terror, and grief for her mother, who would never meet this grandchild. Grayson was overjoyed, but tried to hide his own fear, having lost his own mother so young. "We'll figure it out together," he promised, holding her close. "We'll learn as we go, and we'll love this child with everything we have." Martha was thrilled and immediately took Penelope under her wing, sharing all the wisdom of her own experience as a mother. She helped gather supplies and prepare the cabin, sewing tiny gowns and knitting soft blankets while regaling Penelope with stories of Thomas's infancy. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was sick for the first 3 months and exhausted for most of the rest. But Grayson was endlessly patient, bringing her water when she could not keep anything else down, rubbing her aching back, and reading aloud to her from whatever books or newspapers he could find. Their son was born on a warm May evening. Arriving in a rush after a labor that was mercifully short by frontier standards, he came into the world screaming his outrage, a big, healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's green eyes. They named him John Vincent Lancaster, honoring both grandfathers, and Grayson held him with such tender awe that Penelope fell in love with her husband all over again. Vincent made the trip from Granite to meet his great-nephew, tears streaming down his weathered face as he held the baby carefully. "He looks like your father," he told Penelope, "like John did when we were boys, before life got hard and complicated." Watching her uncle cradle her son, seeing the love and wonder in Grayson's eyes, Penelope felt a contentment she had never thought possible. Her life had been shaped by loss and grief, by terrifying near misses and desperate chances. But all of it had led her here, to this moment, to this family she had built from nothing but love and determination. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter came 2 years after John, a tiny, fierce thing they named Lily Martha after both grandmothers. Then another son, Thomas Paul, and finally another daughter, Caroline Rose. The little cabin became too small, and Grayson built an addition with Thomas's help, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main room. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able. John had his father's quiet intensity and way with horses. Lily was fearless and stubborn, constantly getting into trouble and talking her way out again. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, more interested in books than cattle. Caroline was the baby, adored and spoiled by everyone, with a sunny disposition that lit up any room. Grayson proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving but firm when necessary. He taught the boys to rope and shoot and take care of the land. He taught the girls the same things, ignoring the raised eyebrows of more traditional neighbors, insisting that all his children needed to know how to fend for themselves. Penelope watched her children grow with a bittersweet awareness of time passing. She wished her father could have known them, could have seen the life she had built. But she told them stories about him, about the man who had loved her so well and raised her to be strong. She told them about their great-uncle Vincent, who visited less frequently as the years wore on and his health declined, but who never failed to send letters and small gifts. Vincent died when John was 10, peacefully in his sleep after a long day working in the mine. Penelope grieved deeply for the uncle she had barely known but had come to love. Grayson held her through the tears and made sure she knew it was all right to mourn, even for someone she had only truly known for a few short years. "He was family," Grayson said simply. "That's all that matters." They buried Vincent in the small cemetery outside Granite, and Penelope made sure his grave was marked with a proper headstone that read, "Vincent Vance, beloved brother and uncle, found his way home." She visited whenever she could, bringing flowers in summer and evergreen boughs in winter, making sure he was not forgotten. As the children grew older and more independent, Penelope and Grayson found themselves with time to simply be together again, to remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. They took long rides together through the mountains, revisiting the spot where he had found her that long ago night, now marked with a cairn of stones that Grayson had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Penelope asked once, standing beside the cairn and looking out over the valley below. "Taking me in, changing your whole life for someone you barely knew?" Grayson pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Not for 1 second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the children, and this life we have built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even when I burned the biscuits for 6 months straight while I was learning to cook." "Even then," he said, laughing, "though I'll admit my stomach was grateful when you finally got the hang of it." When John was 18, he announced his intention to marry Sarah Chen, the granddaughter of the widow who had run the boarding house in Granite. Penelope could not help but think of how young they both were, but she also remembered that she had been only 21 when she married Grayson, and that had turned out better than she could have dreamed. The wedding was a grand affair that brought together families from all over the region. Watching her son pledge his life to the pretty, capable young woman beside him, Penelope felt the circle of life completing itself in a way that was both joyful and melancholy. Lily left home at 19 to attend a teacher's college in Denver, scandalizing some of the neighbors but making her parents fiercely proud. Thomas went to work at a bank in Colorado Springs, putting his head for numbers to good use. Only Caroline stayed close, marrying a neighboring rancher's son and settling just a few miles away. The house grew quiet with the children gone, but Penelope found she did not mind as much as she had feared. She and Grayson had each other, and that was enough. They were growing old together, their hair graying and their faces lined, but their love had only deepened with time. Martha passed away peacefully at 78, surrounded by family, and Thomas sold the Lazy L to Grayson at a price far below market value, saying it was only fair since Grayson had helped build it into what it had become. Thomas moved to Colorado Springs to be near his own children, leaving Grayson and Penelope as the sole owners of the ranch they had called home for so many years. It was a responsibility they took seriously, continuing to run the operation with the same care and attention to detail that had made it successful. They brought on younger hands to do the heavy work, but Grayson was still out riding the fence lines well into his 60s, and Penelope still kept the books with her meticulous attention to detail. Their grandchildren started arriving, a new generation of Lancasters and Chens who filled the house with noise and laughter during visits. Penelope loved being a grandmother, loved the way she could spoil these children and then send them home, loved seeing pieces of herself and Grayson reflected in their young faces. On the 40th anniversary of the night Grayson had found her in the darkness, they rode out together to the cairn of stones. They were both slower now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but they still rode together easily, their movements synchronized from years of partnership. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Penelope asked as they stood beside the stones, holding hands in the fading light. "I asked what in God's name you were doing out there alone," Grayson said with a smile, "and I couldn't answer because my teeth were chattering too hard." She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "You saved my life that night." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was drifting before you came along, just going through the motions of living without really being alive. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting." "We built it together," Penelope said. "Everything we have, everything we are, we made it together." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together in the spot where their story had begun. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light and love and meaning. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as years do. They lost friends and gained new ones, watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive. The world around them was changing rapidly, with automobiles replacing horses and electricity coming to even remote ranches, but the essential rhythms of their life together remained constant. When Grayson fell ill at 72, Penelope nursed him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her through 4 pregnancies and countless minor ailments over the years. It was pneumonia, the doctor said, serious but treatable if they were careful. She sat by his bedside day and night, reading to him and holding his hand and refusing to consider the possibility that she might lose him. He recovered, though it took months before he was truly back to his old self. The experience shook them both, a reminder that their time together was not infinite, that they needed to cherish every day they had left. "I'm not done with you yet," Penelope told him when he was well enough to return to light work around the ranch. "We have at least another 20 years together, Grayson Lancaster, and I'll not hear any arguments about it." "Yes, madam," he said, pulling her close and kissing her temple. "Whatever you say." They made it 15 more years, 15 years filled with simple pleasures and deep contentment. They watched the seasons turn, celebrated holidays with their sprawling family, and spent their evenings sitting together on the porch of the cabin that had been their first home, watching the stars come out over the mountains. When Grayson finally passed away at 87, it was peacefully in his sleep with Penelope beside him as she had been for nearly 60 years. She woke in the morning to find him gone, his face peaceful and young, looking in death, and she held his cooling hand and wept for the man who had lit a lantern in the darkness and led her home. The funeral brought family from across the West, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathering to honor the man who had been the foundation of their entire family. They told stories of his kindness and strength, his quiet wisdom and unexpected humor, his unwavering devotion to the woman he loved. Penelope stood at his graveside and spoke the words she had prepared, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her weathered face. "He was the best man I ever knew. He saved my life, and then spent the rest of his making sure I knew what a gift that life could be. I will love him until my own last breath and beyond." She lived another 5 years after Grayson's death, cared for by her children and grandchildren, but never quite recovering from the loss of her partner. She spent her days sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, much as she had that first week at the Lazy L, remembering a lifetime of love and joy and shared purpose. On what would have been their 65th wedding anniversary, Penelope asked John to take her to the cairn of stones where Grayson had found her all those years ago. He helped her from the wagon and supported her as she stood beside the stones, looking out over the valley that had been her home for so long. "Tell me again about the night Pa found you," John said, as he had asked countless times throughout his childhood. "I was stumbling through darkness, lost and alone," Penelope said softly, her eyes distant with memory. "And your father lit a lantern and led me home. He showed me that even in our darkest moments, there can be light, there can be hope, there can be love that transforms everything." That night, she passed away in her sleep in the cabin she and Grayson had shared, a peaceful smile on her face. Her children found her in the morning, still and quiet, her hand resting over her heart where she wore the wooden engagement ring Grayson had carved for her so many years before. They buried her beside Grayson in the little cemetery on the ranch, under a sky so vast and blue it seemed to go on forever. Her headstone read, "Penelope Vance Lancaster, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she found her way home and made it beautiful." The Lazy L continued under John's management, then his son's, a testament to the life that Grayson and Penelope had built together from nothing but love and determination. The cabin where they had raised their family was preserved, becoming a place where each new generation could come and hear the story of the cowboy who lit a lantern in the darkness and the woman who was brave enough to follow it home. And on cold, clear nights when the stars were bright over the Colorado mountains, some claimed you could still see a light bobbing through the darkness near the cairn of stones, a lantern carried by a cowboy looking for someone lost and alone, ready to lead them safely home.